All right, yeah. So in terms of questions, there's a raise hand function. Goodness, it's in the, I think if you go to the participate thing, you can raise a hand. And we'll just walk through those of you who raise your hands. And I think Zoom keeps order for us as well. Or at least if I see it not keeping order, I'll impose order. But so Hong Wang, if you want to go first, do you raise your hand?
Yes, I did raise my hand. Thanks. I hadn't realized we were supposed to read the paper before the talk. So and I also don't work on the nosology of issues in philosophy of psychiatry. So I feel like a complete imposter now.
I didn't expect people to read the paper, let me say. So it's 100% fine if you didn't. So.
But I scanned the paper during the commentary. So and the talk and the commentaries were super clear. So I want to ask two connected sets of questions. And the first is I very much like your idea that we should think of cases where you have justified imposter attitudes as a form of imposter syndrome. So I sort of agree with your specific claim about there being cases where imposter attitudes can be a reasonable, epistemically reasonable response to a difficult social environment. And there my question is, how plastic do you want the notion of epistemic rationality or justification to be? Because if you think of cases like the standard kind of two-factor delusion accounts, part of the analysis of delusions there is to try to see these monothematic delusions as some sort of rational response to rather odd sensory undergoings. And the idea is then you tie the odd sensory undergoings to some kind of malfunctioning brain circuit, and then a further tie down of weird but somewhat, maybe one could even say epistemically reasonable kind of forms of reasoning in response to this very weird kind of sensory input. So in those cases, I'm just wondering, what are the forms of justification that would count as reasonable or not? How plastic is that for this kind of response? And that's the first question. The second question, which is related, is your argument at the end of your paper that nosological and empirical pressures don't necessarily line up with epistemic pressures for understanding this kind of phenomenon. And there I completely agree, because I think this case you've shown is persuasive. But then the question that relates to the issue of broadening is this. I mean, what is the benefit of really working with the category of imposter syndrome if the key thing you want to alleviate is certain kinds of anxiety which are connected with the presence of imposter attitudes? So if that is the key kind of phenomena that one wants to alleviate, then the kind of nosological issue about how we're going to sort of carve up imposter syndrome specifically isn't going to be so important, as it were. And if one then broadens in that way, then in some sense one can have one's cake and also eat it too, because one can say, well, nosological and empirical pressures are pushing that way, epistemic ones are pushing the other way, but really imposter syndrome, it's not a real thing, so the nosology of it isn't so important. What we really want to go for is anxiety and its connection to imposter attitudes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, again, loads of interesting things there, more than I can address. I'm not really familiar with the literature on delusions, so I can't respond to that in any detail, but I guess at least I was thinking of this as more akin to just a kind of an ordinary false belief that we might, the kind that we form every day, rather than something as sort of pathological as a delusion, and it's surely not going to be something where there's a kind of distinctive sort of brain event going on. But nevertheless, maybe I should look more at that. That's helpful to think about. I mean, this I mean, you're surely right that there's many different things we might want to change around imposter syndrome, right, and things we might want to address and so on. I mean, my view, again, going back to the idea of these people who, in my view, have a falsely low opinion of themselves, but kind of feel okay about it, so they don't have the anxiety and so on. I still feel that's a kind of problem, right? Because that's the kind of thing that can prevent you putting yourself forward for opportunities. This is how overconfident people get all the opportunities in life, and the rest of us hold ourselves back, even if we don't really mind, we don't think we don't mind. So I think I don't want to focus only on the sort of anxiety, although of course if someone's really got sort of clinical levels of anxiety, that might need to be the first thing you have to try and address. I mean, I do feel, I mean, the more I think about this, you know, about imposter syndrome and talk to different people about it, the more I feel sort of troubled about it as a concept, but I also recognize that it's out there and people do seem to find it intriguing and useful and interesting. Like, this is one reason there are all these books about it, presumably it's because people like to read about it. And so trying to get a handle on what we might realistically be trying to do with this concept that doesn't involve just abolishing it. So the kind of sort of practical steps forward, I think, is that the way I want to go. But I also suspect that there's some kind of social pressure. Once you hear about imposter syndrome, there's a kind of social pressure to say that you've got it. I have to say, I don't think I suffer from it, actually. I mean, maybe I did a little bit earlier in my career, but I don't my interest in it is not driven by my own suffering, as it were. But even now, I find that a bit difficult to say, because it sounds, I think it can sound kind of arrogant to say that you don't have imposter syndrome. It's like, well, I think I'm so great, you know. And so that's another way, I think, in which having that concept out there can be in some ways damaging. It's one of these concepts where once you hear about it, there's some kind of inclination to put yourself under that category. So I've been reading Hacking recently, so maybe this is, I'm kind of fitting in with that as well, but I'll stop there. Thank you for your questions, though.
Thank you.
Great. Plinio?
Well, thank you, Catherine. I must confess it's the first time I hear about the imposter syndrome and philosophy talking about it. But since I had the impression you were talking about me, I felt a bit concerned. I would like to raise a question. I mean, I love to hear everything, your talk, the discussion. You have a general claim that philosophy may help here. And especially epistemology can help by distinguishing, for instance, false claims and justified beliefs. You know, my question is exactly what Deb did before. What sense of justified? Because I think if someone says S believes that she's an imposter, and we as philosophers say, well, S is justified in her belief. What do we mean by justification here? Maybe there are two senses. And that may help even further, not only distinguishing between true belief and justified belief, but also different senses of a justified belief. So on the one hand, a person can be justified when her performance is good. You know, she checked the evidences, she double checks her reasoning, she investigates the subject. So she does everything she has to do. And then she has good reasons to believe that. But since you are talking about mistaken beliefs, justified mistaken beliefs, her good reasons are not good enough to establish the truth of her belief. There is a mismatch between her epistemic performance and also the quality of the arguments, the reasons. So we can say that something is justified on the one hand in relation to the epistemic performance of the person, but also we can assess or evaluate the quality of the proof or the reasonings. And what you were suggesting in this case is that despite a good epistemic performance, it was not good enough because the belief is mistaken. So perhaps in your two definitions, the narrow and the broad one, you could distinguish a third sense of the concept by taking into account these two kinds of being justified, you know, when you assess. And here comes another suggestion. I don't know, it may be completely wrong. I may be just an imposter here saying something about I don't know anything at all. But it seems that one of your claims is that it's an environmental problem, not an individual one. I hope you're right in most cases, but the suggestion is the following. It's an environment problem when the environment, how can you say that? I'm sorry, I'm a Brazilian, the word is not coming to my mind now, but when the environment puts the person in such a situation that despite her being responsible in her belief, she has a good epistemic performance, and she comes to the conclusion that she's not a good at her job. But we know that the belief is false. So when the environment systematically puts the person in the epistemic justified, a personal epistemic justified position, but she comes to the false conclusion, the reasoning does not establish the truth of her belief, and the belief is mistaken, then it is an environmental problem. It's not a personal problem. So one of the things I was thinking about, I hope you were right, it's an environmental, but when do we know it's an environmental problem? So here's my suggestion. When there is this mismatch between being justified by epistemic performance, but not being justified because the reasoning is not good enough to establish the truth of the belief. Sorry
No, thank you. That's interesting. I mean, in a way, what you've done is sort of open the door for us there to see how this would connect up with the, all the kind of whole literature about knowledge and defining knowledge and just different forms of justification and warrant and so on, and how those different theories and accounts would apply in these cases, right? And so I don't have a particular view that I'm bringing to this, but for those of you who do already have kind of commitments about how you want to think about some of these epistemic notions, then I think there's a sort of applications here. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I guess the way I was thinking about it was the first way of thinking about justification that you mentioned, this idea of kind of sort of well-formed beliefs, so kind of performing your beliefs in a kind of diligent, a diligent, sort of epistemically sensible manner, let's say, kind of going through the right procedures and dealing with the evidence as it appears to you. And of course, there were no guarantees there, right? As we know from skeptical scenarios, amongst other things, that you can be doing your best and still end up without a true belief if you're in a difficult enough environment. I think that was the kind of framework I was thinking about it in. And the reason I think that's the relevant one for what I want to do, although it might be spelled out in different ways, is that I guess I am ultimately concerned with these questions about, well, how can we fix this? Right? So how can we help people to form more accurate beliefs about themselves, and to understand, that's not the only question, but that's an important goal. And to do that, to understand what sort of remedies might be helpful, it's useful, I think, there to see that it's not just about kind of training the person better in critical thinking or doing what we're tempted to do actually when we meet someone with imposter syndrome, which is to say, oh, come on, surely you can see, just cheer up, and can't you see how much, how well you did in that last exam, or look at this lovely review of your book, or something like that. And that's, we're treating the person as if they just need to kind of think a bit better. And I wanted to suggest that that's often not going to be useful, as indeed it isn't. If you try that on people, they kind of smile back at you, but it doesn't fix it. It doesn't cure their imposter syndrome. And in a way, that was my sort of starting point with some experiences like that, thinking, well, these are unhelpful things to say in general. So what might be a more helpful thing to do if we want to help someone who's suffering from imposter syndrome? And then the thought is, well, it's not just to change how they form their beliefs or how to change how they're thinking about this, but it's more to kind of maybe try and change look at what evidence is available to them and try and make that a less misleading situation for them. So thank you.
Adam.
Yes, so I just want to ask quickly about the validity of some of the diagnostic measures, like the diagnostic tools that you talked about at the beginning, these questions. And I'm curious what your take on that is, because one of them that was listed on there was like something along the lines of like thinking that you got a position because you knew the right person, or like right place, right time, which that strikes me as like targeting something very different than maybe some of the other questions, because like not only is that, can that be true, but that's frequently true, right? That's often the case, that like like most success has a lot to do with luck in right place, right time. So I'm just curious about that specifically, and then just more in general, like what your take is on the validity of some of these questions and tools that are used to diagnose these imposter attitudes.
Yeah, I'm just going to share that slide again, because I think I'm glad you asked about this. So there's this kind of Clance scale, like that. And these are only 5 of these questions rather than 20. Yeah, my personal view is this whole thing is a complete mess, but I'm a little bit hesitant to say that in public. I mean, I am saying it in public, but I'm not a psychologist. I don't design these questionnaires myself. But one thing you notice here, right, is which strikes me as very strange, is that the kind of the Likert examples, they mix up sometimes and true, right? So if I've often succeeded on a test or task, I suppose I think, like, yes, often this happens to me. Should I answer 4 because often is the right answer, or should I answer 5 because it's very true? So there's that kind of weird thing going on. There's almost none of the items ask the person to compare almost none of the items ask the person to think about whether they're worrying unnecessarily or anything like that. There's no sort of call to sort of evaluate that. But let me focus on that question 5, the one that you asked about in particular. I mean, that's surely true for most of us, right? I mean, you can't apply for a job if you don't know about it, or and that's not to say that these things are underhand or bad, right? But of course, you have to be open to the right sort of opportunities and so on. I mean, it's people living in kind of closed off communities in the Amazon don't get jobs in UK universities, right? I mean, to some extent this is true of everybody all the time, and even without such silly examples. I mean, it's true. This is something that Sarah Paul says in her paper, actually, that she thinks. So I talk about how to reduce people's worries about this kind of thing, and she says everyone should be more worried that they only got their success through these. We should all be recognizing that we succeed through these sorts of factors, not just our own talents. And I've got some sympathy with that. But what you were asking about there, I think, was the thought that this is a different sort of explanation of my success, right? So people with imposter syndrome who acknowledge that they're getting positive feedback need to have an explanation for why do other people think well of them or seem to think well of them when they secretly know that they're no good at their job. And so the big explanations I talked about in the actual presentation were, it's because I work so hard, I get away with it. Or something about luck, but then there's also this kind of social connections thing. And so I think the idea is supposed to be that it's one of the kind of alternative explanations that people generate for themselves about why they haven't been fired yet, or why they've got to where they have got to so far. Given that their assumption that it can't be because they're talented and so on. So one thing I've tried to press on in other work in this area is thinking about, I think there's a kind of myth that the best sort of success is the success that you get purely through your brilliance and kind of innate talent or something like that, and that having support from other people or seeking out opportunities, or indeed working hard, or indeed luck, makes your success kind of in some ways less creditable or something like that. And that's something else we might try and push back against. As a sort of way of resisting imposter syndrome, is to say, and if you knew the right people you could work with, and you developed your relationships and worked together in a team, and that's how you succeeded. Well, maybe that's something that you should feel proud of, not something that should make you worry about yourself. So you sparked lots of concerns I have about this kind of this questionnaire, but I hope that addressed something of what you're asking about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Laura?
Sorry. It's just a small comment, because thank you for the talk. I'm really interested about this problem or this case. And I was just thinking about, I think of the situation as very ambivalent. And when you were talking about the case in which you have justified beliefs about your incompetence or whatever, or like that you're not good, I think, and whether that should be included, and like you should be included as having the syndrome or something. I think it's often the case that you go back and forth with feeling that you are good and you are not good. Sometimes you do have beliefs that you are good. Sometimes you can, I don't know, magically focus and say, okay, yeah, I did something good, or maybe just go back and read a paper you wrote sometime in the past, and then you think, oh, that's actually good what I wrote, and so then you get the sense that, oh yeah, you know, and then something happened and you're back to, no, I'm not good, and so there's some ambivalence. And also I was thinking in this other situation, which is that you might be good at your job because you have some very good features, like maybe you're very creative, or you know, you come up with good ideas, etc. But you have other things like maybe you don't speak well, or you are too shy, and so in situations you find it hard to articulate yourself and whatever. And so you get a mix of like, so you have some justification to think you're not good enough because there is some aspects, that maybe are predominant in, like, I think about academia. If you are not good at speaking, for example, or, it's just the kind of thing that is a bit bad because you are often in these environments where you have to be clever and articulate, etc. And so that might just, make you feel, and also you get the feedback because people don't talk to you, or they don't pay attention to what you're saying, etc. So you do get the feedback that you're kind of not good enough, even though for other things are probably more important, is that you get good ideas. For example, you write good papers or whatever, you're still good enough, and actually you could even be better than other people. And so you get all this mixture of having justified, unjustified, false, true beliefs. And I think also, that's the last thing I say, is that there's a lot of confusion in the state, that you can't tell sometimes. You can't tell which ones are false beliefs and which ones are true beliefs. You feel unjustified, you feel justified. It's just, and then that's just to say that maybe in the environment could help you to know, to find out better, because you are confused about which of your beliefs are, you can't really tell sometimes. Okay, so that's...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff there. And just on that last point, I mean, this is I mean, again, more generally in epistemology, but we're familiar with this thought that there's something weird about assessing your own beliefs for truth and justification, because in some sense, of course, I think they're justified. Otherwise, they wouldn't be my beliefs, right? It's hard. I mean, that's not quite right, but there's something distinctive about the first person perspective on one's own beliefs, which makes it particularly hard, I think, to think about imposter syndrome in one's own case, because you're trying to assess, what do I believe, but also at the same time, is that accurate, and is it justified, and so on, and trying to hold some quite sort of attitudes that are actually somewhat in tension, holding them together. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not surprising that we see imposter syndrome particularly. Well, okay, this isn't like an empirical claim, but it's not an empirical study. It's not surprising that imposter syndrome is often talked about in fields where the kind of criteria for what is good work are quite disputed, right? So academic work, things like philosophy and so on, but also creative work, right? It's not so, these are areas in which there are lots of different ways of being good at something, or you might think that, or different people have different views about what good philosophy is and so on. And what is a good philosopher, right? That's something further, that might be to do with what you write, but also how you can express yourself verbally, as you're saying, or just how you interact with other people. So there's the more sort of unclarity there is about what it is to be good at something, that the easier it's going to be, I think, to kind of have imposter concerns. But also, I think one reason we can end up prone to imposter syndrome for the kind of things that you're talking about there, about to do with fluency and so on, is that often imposter syndrome is about making a comparison between myself and other people somehow seem more impressive, or they seem to be finding it easier, or they seem to be good at things that I struggle with, and so on. And that can often lead people to imposter syndrome. And so I think being overly impressed by other people's fluency or ease of speaking can, as you say, sort of prompt us towards imposter syndrome. I mean, I think the ambivalence as well is very natural, and to some extent, some of that I think we ought to have, right? I mean, it would be weird to be never questioning ourselves or never having doubts. And of course, some of the things we write are better than the other things we write. I mean, you should expect to have somewhat varying judgments about your own quality from time to time. But then that does make it harder to know what we should think of as a sort of problematic amount of self-doubt, something we might want to think of as imposter syndrome, compared to just something which is just part of an ordinary and sort of relatively healthy way of living one's life. And that's hard to judge looking at other people, but it's perhaps even particularly hard to judge what's sensible in one's own case. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So I put myself up on the question list. Thank you for the talk. So one of the things I really like about this paper is that it's the kind of paper that showcases for people outside of philosophy, our peers out, elsewhere in the university, like the value of conceptual analysis and what we do in the halls of philosophy. I often find it difficult to convince them of the importance and interest of what we do and our methods. And
that's great to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I think this is really great for the discipline as a whole, and also the project in particular. And I found myself just sort of rotating through the different kinds of beliefs or lack of beliefs that might play a role in imposter syndrome, maybe some of which, I mean, they're all probably on your radar. You focused on not believing one's work is good. I was thinking that some other ones might be not believing one's work is important. So you could have good work that's not, not making headway on what are, for whatever reason, deemed the more important problems. You might also have comparative beliefs about you relative to your peers. So maybe you think your work is good and important, but it's not as good or important as your peers' work. And this is what's giving rise to the syndrome. You might also, for some reason, think that maybe in general you're on a par with your peers, but you're not on par with your best peers, or you don't have the potential to be on par with your best peers. And this is giving rise to the syndrome. And then there might also be some normative beliefs about the attitudes of your peers. So maybe you think your work is good and important, and as good as important as your peers to a reasonable standard, but you don't believe your peers believe this. And this is what's giving rise. Or maybe you think they do believe it, but you don't believe they ought to believe it, or at least you think it's permissible for them not to believe it. And if you think it's okay for them, like they're rational not believing that your work is good and important, like that's going to give rise to some of these like negative feelings that seem constitutive of the syndrome you're describing. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's really helpful. I mean, so some of these things I've thought about, and then there's kind of permutations and so on, but I haven't. I know I'm so upfront. I haven't kind of come up with anything very definite to say about this stuff, because you start to, it starts to feel like maybe there's a kind of whole family of things going on here, and then it becomes harder to answer the question of, well, which things do we want to stick under this concept of imposter syndrome, and which things should we try and handle in some other way? I mean, I think the comparative, yeah, so I mean, let me just pick up on the comparative thing, right? So often I think we as I was actually just suggesting in response to Laura there, I mean, some of the time, so some of these judgments, some of my judgments about myself and the quality of my work are going to be directly comparative. I just don't think I'm as good as the other people in my class or whatever it might be. Other times I might be using that kind of comparative judgment as a way of accessing the sort of absolute standards or something like that. So I might think I'm better than these people, but now I think that this was a particularly crummy class, or or something like that. So that we're not meeting the kind of the standards that we ought to be meeting, something like that. And I mean, one reason those are interesting distinctions to make is we might think if there is something pathological going on here, if I'm wrong about some of this stuff, then how to kind of alleviate those mistakes might be different in different cases. So one thing we might say to people in the grip of some of these worries would be to point out that everyone fails sometimes, and so-and-so had to work really hard to get here as well as you, and they don't find it as easy as they make out, or maybe they they had a lot more training than you did, so no wonder if they we might sort of try and help people think more clearly about what other people are doing. But if their main concern is not the comparative one, it's more the absolute one, we might say, well, look, maybe we can try and address this by thinking about, are you setting unreasonably high standards? I mean, it does seem to me it's kind of, again, we're sort of back to this kind of conceptual analysis and wondering what to include under the concept. And it does seem central, if we're going to call it imposter syndrome, there has to be some idea that other people, or that you're getting away with something, or that other people are perhaps not seeing the real you, or something like that, or they don't appreciate, or they think more highly of you than they ought to. But even that's a bit tricky, because sometimes people who have imposter syndrome. So I've had students like this, right? So they'll say kind of self-deprecating things, and then you say, well, but so-and-so said all that nice stuff about your work, why don't you take that seriously? And they'll say, oh, well, they were just being kind, or they knew I would be upset if they criticized me too harshly, or whatever. So there's this idea that other people don't really think well of me, they're just kind of pretending to, because they want to be nice, or they don't want to appear sexist, or whatever, or they don't want to deal with my tears later, whatever it might be. So yeah, I'm not even sure whether we want to include some of those things as imposter syndrome. All right, so I guess you've just given me a lot of different possible imposter attitudes, and I need to work out which permutations of those I want to count as imposter syndrome. And I guess the main thing I want to say in response is that how I would try and answer that would be to try and think about whether what that would tell us about how to try and alleviate imposter syndrome, or help people kind of get a more accurate view of themselves, or feel better about themselves. But then there is always this risk that you don't want to take in the sort of healthy self-doubt, or the kind of, just some people do set themselves very high standards and kind of diligently work towards that, and that can be actually a good thing in their lives. And we don't want to sort of say that that's a kind of syndrome that needs to be alleviated. If they find that a kind of generally sort of satisfactory, kind of motivating thing that works for them. So yeah, so thank you. So you give me a lot more complications, but I'll try and deal with them.
Well, I don't know how much they complicate things. Perhaps isn't necessary that there'd be just one attitude, or that it be a highly unified class. It might just have some general features in common, or weighting among some set. So I don't think I've generated any particular problem for your thesis.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that might do it. We're at about time anyway. So Katherine, thank you so much for being with us. Leonie and Deb, thank you so much for your comments. And on weather, well, we had actually a really beautiful day in Cologne, but it was like other people are having more difficult weather, and it's nice not to have to travel the weather. So this is very enjoyable to have from the comfort of our respective places. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for everyone who's come along, and the commentators in particular. This has been really fun for me. And I think it's only 5 o'clock, but I think I can have a beer now. I'll allow that. Thank you all. Excellent. Take care. Bye-bye.
That was today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Tune in for the next episodes of Figments of the Brain on our SoundCloud page. It's soundcloud.com/brainfigments, or find the podcast on our homepage at www.concept-phil.de.